Okay, we shall start now. Welcome to today's webinar titled How to Handle Journal Rejection, Converting a Failure into an Opportunity. So I'm Nicole, I'm from Inago, and I'd like to mention over here this webinar has been conducted specifically, exclusively for UB academicians. UB and Inago has been working together from quite some time in order to improve the quality of their overall research output and providing them a subsidized access not only to manuscript preparation services, but also to certain author education initiatives. Without further ado, I'd like to give the mic to Dr. Despina, who will be taking through the academic topic of today. Please, over to you, Dr. Despina.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today for this pertinent topic for all investigators. So how to handle journal rejection and how to convert such a seemingly failure into an opportunity. My name is Despina Sanudo and I'm an associate professor of pharmacogenomics at the medical school at the University of Athens. I've been working in the research field for over 20 years now. So I've had my fair share of submissions, rejections, and acceptances with over 100 publications. This is a disclaimer from Inago, just a few notes about Inago that you're probably already aware of. And allow me to start with today's agenda. First of all, we will go over an overview of the concept of manuscript rejection, some statistics, and what does it practically mean, how common it is. We will look at a case study on popular manuscript rejection cases, which is very interesting from, at least in my opinion, and I think educational for everyone. We will look at how to handle the actual rejection process, how to read a rejection letter and decide on the future course of action, and then tips on overcoming journal rejection. So let's start with an overview to see exactly what we're talking about here. When a manuscript is rejected, or I should say, let's start one step back. When a manuscript is submitted, what does the editor first check for? Because the manuscript, once submitted, first goes through the editorial check, and if it passes that, then it is sent out to reviewers. But what does the editor check when he first receives your manuscript? First of all, he looks at the novelty of the research study. Is it something new that will be contributing to the international literature in this field? Is it suitable and relevant to the specific journal? And this is very important for the editor and for the journal. It has to be within the scope. It looks at the qualification and affiliations of the authors to make sure that they're real people who have a track record in science, at least some of them. Inevitably, some may be younger investigators. And of course, he or she checks for plagiarism or language errors, because anything that is submitted for publication needs to be novel, or if it reproduces, copies, or uses material from other sources, needs to have appropriately acknowledged them. And then, if he gives the green light, the manuscript is passed on to reviewers. What will they check for? Originality of the topic and the findings. If the key findings are of significance in the field, is it just a random observation, or have the authors actually investigated in depth the cause and significance, impact, implications of their findings? Have they used an appropriate methodology to answer the scientific question at hand? Are there accurate and appropriate citations used throughout the manuscript? What's the depth of the investigation? Is it just a description of something that they observed, or have they looked at it in depth to determine parameters that may be influencing it, implications, biological or clinical implications it may have they validated their initial observations, and so on and so forth. Validation is a very important part. Just observing something once can be questioned. If it has been validated in different settings with different methodologies in different cohorts, depending on the type of work, then it becomes a much stronger piece of evidence. Now, based on this criteria, the editor, together with the reviewers, will decide whether a manuscript can be accepted, needs to be revised, or should be rejected. And there's different types of rejection one needs to be aware of, and therefore prepare in the best possible way so as to avoid them. One type of rejection is called desk rejection. This is when the manuscript is rejected directly by the editors at the very first steps of the process without being sent out to reviewers. There's the flat-out rejection, when the manuscript is rejected after receiving 2 or more negative reviews with no possibility of resubmission. So in this scenario, you have the reviewers giving a negative decision, negative reviews on the manuscript. The editor may have invited 2 or more reviewers, and the editor will have to decide based on their feedback if the manuscript should be rejected altogether, or if the third scenario presented here can be considered, where the manuscript is rejected, but if the authors successfully address all of the reviewer comments, they could potentially consider resubmitting. Now, in this third scenario, of course, there is absolutely no guarantee that if they address the reviewer comments, their manuscript will be accepted. No, it's just giving them the opportunity to make extensive revisions that usually will involve additional experimental work and extensive changes to the manuscript, and then resubmit, which means that the submission process will take place from scratch. They will have to resubmit every part of the manuscript through the submission portal. The manuscript will be given a different submission number, and it will be processed as a new manuscript, including usually the point-by-point response to reviewers from the original assessment. Now, what are common reasons for rejection? The lack of originality is a very important one. If a manuscript talks about a topic that has been extensively discussed in the past, where multiple publications are already available, and the findings, even in part, have been previously discovered and discussed by other research teams. Quality of language is also important, because you may have the best findings, the best results data in the world, but if they cannot be communicated in a way that is comprehensible and easy to appreciate by the reader, then they will not get the credit and recognition that they deserve. Another reason is the limited or inappropriate methodology. If an investigation has only used a limited number of approaches, potentially inappropriate approaches to answer the specific scientific question, or inadequate approaches to fully address that scientific question that they're aiming to, then the reviewers will probably criticize that, ask for more experiments, ask for a different approach, and usually this ends up leading to a reject decision. Plagiarism or dual submission, it's a major misconduct, form of misconduct, should be avoided at all costs. If someone does it purposely or accidentally, the end result is the same. It has to be avoided, and you have to be extremely cautious when you prepare your manuscript to avoid any form of plagiarism, and of course to never submit your work to more than one journal at a time. Make sure that you take into consideration self-plagiarism as well. Sometimes where inclined to assume, to consider that what we have previously written and published in a way is our own piece of work, and then repeating it in a new manuscript doesn't matter. That's wrong. It does matter. Once it has been published, the copyrights are with the journal where it's been published in, and therefore reproducing this piece of text, no matter how small, is considered self-plagiarism. So you should make sure to provide the appropriate citations. Poor quality of data is another very common reason for rejection by the reviewers. If the data you're presenting is not solid enough, if the figures you've presented are of poor quality or misleading, and the information there does not stand up to the quality standards of the journal, it's very likely that it will get rejected. You may be given the opportunity to resubmit, but maybe not. So quality of the data presented is also of utmost importance. Non-conformation to journal guidelines, that's also an issue that puts off reviewers and the editor. It gives a poor impression. It may not be the primary reason for rejection, but they will come back and tell you to revise and adjust this. And this parameter in combination with others can give such a bad impression that make reviewers and the editor more inclined to reject. Unsupported claims is also something that reviewers will pick up on. If you're overstating the importance of your findings, or if your conclusions are not supported by the data you actually have, then they will criticize that heavily. And if it's something minor, they may ask you to change it. If it's something major, they will reject. And poor scientific writing, which goes together with the quality of language, although it's not identical, poor scientific writing as a whole can end up to manuscript rejection. So your manuscript needs to be well structured. The different sections need to be carefully weighed. There needs to be a smooth flow and transition from one section to the next. The key messages from every paragraph need to be evident to the reader. And usually for every paragraph, you should aim to have a nice opening sentence setting the stage for the information that's coming, and an appropriate concluding sentence with the take-home message for every paragraph. This really helps the reader appreciate and easily get the message that you're trying to convey. The easier the message it is to identify and the more convincing your data, the happier the reader will be, the more they will enjoy, appreciate what you have discovered, and therefore the more likely they are to keep reading your manuscript and eventually cite it. Let's look at statistically the most common reasons for rejection based on publicly available information. So in the slide here, you're seeing the statistics from the publisher Springer. What are the most common reasons for rejection? The biggest one, as you'll see here, is poor methodology. The reviewers considered that the majority of manuscripts that are being submitted, at least in this publisher, do not have the appropriate methodology to answer the scientific questions at hand. The second biggest reason is lack of originality, not sufficiently new information. 3 is poor scientific content. And then author issues poor language, out of scope for the journal, poor references, or incomplete data. So you see how important these parameters are. And by knowing this, you can prepare accordingly your manuscript so as to minimize the chances of rejection. What about the manuscript rejection rate? I'm not sure if you're aware of the statistics, but you may be surprised to know that in some journals, this can be very high, even higher than 80%. And in some cases, it can be higher than 90% rejection rate. It means that 8 to 9 out of 10 in some journals 8 or 9 out of 10 manuscripts submitted will be rejected. So rejection, you could say, is the rule, and acceptance is the rare occasion. Let's look at some more numbers here. According to the American Psychological Association, in their 2013 report, its top journals averaged a rejection rate of about 76%. That's the average rejection rate. Elsevier, one of the largest publishers in the world, claims a rate of 30 to 50%, and they have a very large number of different journals. Also, another article, 2013, in Nature Materials, reported a rate of about rejection rate, that is, of about 87%, with only about 60% accepted after peer review, considering that you have the editorial rejection, the desk rejection, and the reviewer-based rejection. These numbers are very high. The reason for disclosing these to you and sharing this information is not to discourage you. On the opposite, it is to tell you that rejection is something so common that everybody pretty much experiences it. It's an opportunity to learn, to grow, to become a better, more mature scientist, more competitive in your writing, your presentation skills, in the design of your experiments and your projects, and through this process, increase your personal success rate, acceptance rate when it comes to manuscript submission. So rejection is something very, very common. Let's look at some more numbers here. These figures come from Nature Journal. You'll see through the different years how many thousands of submissions they have been receiving. So from 1997, where they were receiving approximately 7,500 submissions, up to 2017, when they've been receiving over 10,500 submissions per year. Look at how many papers are actually published. A very, very small percentage. So their rejection rate is currently greater than 90%. With this in mind, let's look at some examples where rejections have not hindered people's career, and the rejection could have been for the wrong reason, could have been unjust, but nevertheless did not stop those scientists from succeeding, from finding solutions and finding their way up in their career progression. So let's look at case one. The reason for rejection in this case was existing submission backlogs in this specific journal. That was back in 1937. The Nature Journal rejected the seminal paper by Hans Krebs on the citric acid cycle, entitled "The Role of Citric Acid in Intermediate Metabolism in Animal Tissues." This was indeed a seminal piece of work, and it was rejected, as you'll see in a moment, because the journal had too many other articles waiting to be published, and therefore the waiting time for considering this one would have been too long. The paper was eventually published a couple of months later in the journal called Enzymologia. So the authors did not waste any time waiting. They went ahead to resubmit to another journal. Dr. Krebs, who, as you can infer, was the one who discovered the Krebs cycle, which was described in this very manuscript, he wrote in his memoir, "This was the first time in my career, after having published more than 50 papers, that I had rejection or semi-rejection." And this, of course, was a seminal paper that the information originating there became an integral part of the biological knowledge we have today. And this is the rejection letter he actually got back in 1937 from Nature. It says the editor of Nature presents his compliments to Mr. Krebs and regrets that as he has already sufficient letters to fill the correspondence columns of Nature for 7 or 8 weeks, it is undesirable to accept further letters at the present time. And they go on to recommend that he considers submitting his work somewhere else. Let's look at another example, case 2. The reason for rejection here was that the reviewers did not agree with the title that had been given to the manuscript. So Murray Gell-Mann, a leading physicist, classified elementary particles and their interactions. The article was rejected by Physics Review in 1953 due to its title. In 1969, he received the Nobel Prize in Physics for his contributions and discoveries concerning the classification of elementary particles and their interactions. So you can see that editors and reviewers are not always perfect. They are human. They may have misinterpreted, misunderstood, or inappropriately weighed the significance of a manuscript. Murray Gell-Mann goes on to say, "That was not my title, which was Isotonic Spin and Curious Particles. Physical Review rejected curious particles. I tried strange particles and they rejected that too. They insisted on new unstable particles. That was the only phrase sufficiently pompous for the editors of the Physical Review. I should say now that I have always hated the Physical Review letters, and almost 20 years ago, I decided never again to publish in that journal. But in 1953, I was scarcely in a position to shop around, because he was still at the earlier stages of his career." Let's look at case number 3, reasons for rejection, a doubtful hypothesis. So in 1955, the Journal of Clinical Investigation rejected Rosalind Yallow's paper on radioimmunoassay, a widely used technique for determining antibody levels. She was the second woman to win a Nobel Prize in 1977 in physiology or medicine for the discovery of radioimmunoassay. Yet that very paper of hers was rejected. The rejection letter from the Journal of Clinical Investigation, you can see the original in your screen here, said, "Dear Dr. Burson, I regret that the revision of your paper entitled Insulin I 131 Metabolism in Human Subjects," and so on and so forth, is not acceptable for publication in the journal. The second major criticism relates to the dogmatic conclusions set forth, which are not warranted by the data. The experts in this field have been particularly emphatic in rejecting your positive statement that the conclusion that the globulin responsible for insulin binding is an acquired antibody appears to be inescapable. And you can see here how the reviewers completely disagree with the conclusions and the hypothesis set forward by the author. Of course, the author ended up being proved right and the reviewers ended up being proved wrong. However, the manuscript had been rejected and this journal missed out on a very strong publication, which would have received thousands of citations. Now let's look at one more case. In 1966, the paper on application of Fourier transform spectroscopy, to magnetic resonance. This was a paper by the chemistry Nobel laureate Richard Ernst. He got the Nobel in 1991. So in 1966, the reviewers did not and could not yet appreciate the value of his work. This seminal paper was rejected twice by the Journal of Chemical Physics before it was eventually published in the Review of Scientific Instruments. The Nobel laureate said, "The response to our invention was, however, meager. The paper that described our achievements was rejected twice by the Journal of Chemical Physics to be finally accepted and published in the Review of Scientific Instruments. So you can tell through the statements of all these authors that, of course, they were hurt, they were bitter about it, but they didn't stop believing in their data and pursuing their publication, and eventually not only getting their work published, but getting all the recognition that they deserved. So the road to publication, it's not a smooth and easy one always. One more case for you, case 5. Kary Mullis invented the PCR technique to replicate DNA, a technique that's used in all molecular labs and genetics labs pretty much around the world today. However, initially, both Science and Nature journals rejected his research paper, which was later published in 1985 in Methods in Enzymology. Kary Mullis, who also received a Nobel Prize, states, Dan Koshland would be the editor of Science when my first PCR paper was rejected from that journal, and also the editor when PCR was 3 years later proclaimed Molecule of the Year. So you can see how, yes, they were hurt. They will remember, of course, their rejection, but they moved on and got their recognition. So coming back to us, and how do we ensure we handle rejection in the most effective possible way? First of all, how do we read a rejection letter and how we decide the further course of action? A rejection letter will usually have the following structure. First of all, it will have a statement of the decision type. If it's been accepted, requires minor revisions, major revisions, reject by may resubmit, or a hard reject. This will be usually within the first couple of sentences in that letter. Then we'll follow the reviewer's comments. They could be comments from multiple reviewers, they could be extensive, and usually in the case of rejections, they are extensive. And then in the letter, you will also have the editorial comments. What was the editor's impression based on what he read and based on what the feedback, based on the feedback that the reviewers gave. So this is what you will first see. In the case of an acceptance, the letter, which will be a pleasure for you to read, will start by stating that it has been accepted for publication as a regular paper or review paper, depending on what you've submitted. It will state the name of the journal, and then it will go on to talk about the process to publication. So small steps that you need to take to adjust it for publication. If it is a soft rejection, what you will see is a letter like this, where it will start by saying, well, we find your work of some potential interest or something along the lines. Significant concerns have been raised, so your manuscript cannot be accepted as is, therefore it is rejected. But should further experimental data allow you to address the criticism, we would be happy to look at the revised manuscript. So in a way, the editor is saying there are significant shortcomings, we cannot accept it as is, but we would welcome you to revise it and send it back to us, so we will reconsider it. So although a rejection, this is a very friendly letter inviting further work from these authors. So while the editorial team finds it interesting, they would like to see the reviewer comments addressed. Now, in the case of a hard rejection, it clearly states that, for example, here the phrasing that they've used, the message will be the same across different letters, but it states that your topic would be appropriate for the specific journal. Here it is Science, and the analysis is interesting. However, following discussions, in this case with the editors and members of the board, it has been given a low priority compared to others. So here it's a hard rejection where they do not give you feedback on how to improve, and they flat out say, you cannot resubmit this here, it's not a priority for us. So although it may fit the scope, it is not significant enough for this journal. Another letter that you may get is this, where the manuscript is actually rejected, hard rejection for this journal, but you're offered the opportunity by the editor to transfer internally your manuscript to another journal of the same publisher. And this has become more popular over the recent years, and this way the different publishers are trying to give an opportunity to a manuscript to be published in one of their journals, even if it doesn't fit the scope or the standards of the author's first choice. So it could say something like, although we regret that we cannot offer to publish your paper in the specific journal for editorial reasons, it may be appropriate for another journal in the same publishing group. And it may give you specific examples, or it may even direct you to a specific journal of that publishing group, because they may consider that thematically it would be a better fit. So in this case, they're trying to say that your paper, yes, it is interesting. The reviewers or the editor do not consider it suitable for the specific journal, but we're giving you the opportunity to transfer to another journal. And then it is your decision if you want to go ahead with this transfer or not. If the journal that they're recommending is something that fits your goals, your vision, your hopes for the specific manuscript. It's not always the case, but sometimes it is. When they transfer your manuscript, if and when they transfer your manuscript to another journal, often they will transfer along the original reviewer comments, so that the editor of the new journal and the reviewers of the new journal already have a basis to work with, and this saves time. It also saves time on having to resubmit everything or reformat everything for a new journal. So how does the article transfer service work? Your manuscript, if it's accepted, great. If it's rejected, it's rejected. You have to decide what you will be doing. But if it's offered to be transferred to another journal, then you may be given a number of choices or not, or be directly indicated one specific journal. And in this case, as I mentioned, one, you have to decide if you want to go ahead with a transfer. If you do and it serves your purposes, then the benefits you have is that you're saving time on resubmission, you're saving time on having reviewers start from scratch. And if it's been recommended from within that publishing group, then it could mean that the editor has already waited and considers then this would be a good match for your manuscript. So you may have better chances because someone has already filtered and recommended. Another example, and this is the revise and resubmit. This is another option where the reviewers may indicate that there are numerous technical and scientific issues raised in regard, for example, the interpretation, in this case of structural studies, but the main issue here is that there are scientific and technical issues. It cannot be accepted as it is, but if these comments are sufficiently and successfully addressed, and usually this will involve additional experiments, more extended work, potentially new methodology, replication in other patient cohorts, for example, it will need a significant amount of work. So if all this is done and presented in a extensively revised manuscript, then the journal would consider sending the manuscript back to reviewers. So in this case, again, you have a clear rejection with the opportunity to resubmit, although here there's just a fine difference from the soft rejection. In this case here, you're usually asked for even more extensive revisions, and you are asked to resubmit, which means new submission, new ID for your manuscript, starting the evaluation process from scratch. In this process, they may or may not send it to the same reviewers. They have every right to send it to new reviewers, which of course may have additional comments or different opinion from the previous ones. Nevertheless, in all the cases where when you are resubmitting a manuscript to the same journal, whether it's considered a new submission or not, make sure that you include a point-by-point response to the reviewers and that you have highlighted all the changes you made in the manuscript. So in this case, take-home message, the reviewers may ask for numerous technical or scientific revisions, changes in the way the data is interpreted, changes in the conclusions that are reached if they don't agree with the conclusions you've reached, so you would have to reconsider them, and then you would have to decide if you want to do that and resubmit. I have to say that not everyone will agree to the reviewer comments, and not everyone will want to go through this process to resubmit in the same journal. It is up to you. If you consider the reviewer's comments helpful, meaningful, and steps to improve your manuscript, or if you disagree with them. In the case when you disagree, you have to defend your case, as we will see later on, or completely forget about this journal and move on to another one. Let's look at some tips on overcoming journal rejection. So what does one think and how does one work post-journal rejection? What are the steps, the thoughts, the things you can do? So if you want to go ahead with resubmission, you must make the suggested changes and resubmit the manuscript to the same journal. If you are not happy with that journal, you can make the suggested changes and resubmit the manuscript to a different journal. It's entirely up to you. You're totally free to do so. Another option is to make minimal or no changes to the manuscript. For example, if you don't agree with the reviewer comments, or if it's not possible, practically possible for you to address some of those comments, and then submit to a new journal. Another option is to discard the idea of publishing your manuscript, but post it on sites such as Figshare or Dryad. And another option is to appeal against the manuscript decision and provide solid evidence to support your opinion that the manuscript is fine just the way it is. This last scenario is the hardest one of all, and you would really need to provide solid evidence from the literature or other data to support your opinion. The chances of success of this fifth step are very low. Step number 4 is something that I would discourage you, at least at first, because it may be really worth trying harder to improve and publish your manuscript and include it in your CV and get all the citations and so on and so forth. So I would really start with steps 1, 2, 3 before moving on to considering 4 and 5. Towards overcoming journal rejection, let's look at the 3 main options here: resubmission to the same journal, appeal against the rejection, submission to a new journal. What would the steps involved in each one of those cases be? So resubmission to the same journal. If your manuscript has received a soft rejection or a reject but may resubmit decision, then you can revise and resubmit as a new manuscript. Remember, it's considered a new manuscript, so it's a full new submission. In this case, you must prepare carefully a point-by-point response to reviews, a very polite response letter with full evidence and bibliographical support and potentially new data, and then a new manuscript where you will be incorporating all the new information, revising and improving any parts that you can, and clearly indicating to the reviewers what changes you've made. So in this case, you must make sure that the journal will accept the revised version, and this will be obvious for the letter they will have sent you. Carefully address any comments, and in the case that you disagree with the reviewers, provide all as strong evidence as you can to support your opinion. As I said, it's okay to disagree. Scientists don't always agree 100%, and this is healthy debate. This leads to healthy debates moving forward. But you have to provide as strong evidence as possible to support your opinion and possibly help the reviewer understand better what you meant in the first place. Sometimes what may seem as a disagreement is actually the fact that the reviewer did not understand exactly what you were trying to say. So either providing evidence and or improving the way you're expressing something could help clear any misunderstandings. And then enrich your manuscript as much as you can with improved text, with new data, with clarifications of different concepts, with stronger citations, elaborate explanations where needed, and then make sure that first of all, your conclusions and their significance are clearly spelled out throughout the manuscript. What is the anticipated impact of your work, and what do you anticipate to be its contribution to this scientific field in the future? This is very important for both the reviewers and the editors to understand and appreciate, so that they will be able to either accept right away or help you improve your manuscript so that it can be accepted. Now, if your manuscript has received a hard rejection, and you're considering appealing against this rejection, check, first of all, the journal appeal policy. Does it accept appeals against rejection or not? If they do and you go ahead with it, the journal editors will investigate and may ask for additional reviewers or editorial board members to reassess your manuscript. Needless to say, this is not always successful. I would say it's rarely a successful approach, and it will inevitably take up some time before you hear back from them. So weigh carefully if this is the approach that you want to take. And certainly do so if you're convinced that you have strong evidence to argue against the decision that was made for your manuscript. So tips for writing the appeal letter if you decide to go ahead with it. First of all, as hard as it may seem, try to leave emotions out of it. This is going to be extremely difficult. You may feel very passionate about the quality and significance of your work as opposed to the reviewers or the editor, but you have to write back to them in the most objective and scientific way possible. So if this means taking some time to calm down before you write it, then please do so. When you write this letter, stick to the facts. Provide a rational response. Make point-by-point responses to the reviewers, and know the specifics from the editor as to what was wrong and why your manuscript was rejected. And above all, be respectful in the way that you write, in the way you express yourself about the editor and the reviewers. Take time to re-explain key points if you feel that they have not been understood well. Some tips for the effective appeal letter: clearly state why you disagree with the decision and provide any new information that you would like the editors to take into consideration. If the reviewers have noted certain shortcomings, suggest how you could address them to rectify the situation and strengthen your manuscript. Express that it would be possible for you to do so. Clearly explain the reasons why you disagree with the decisions and present again a point-by-point response to the reviewers. And if applicable, discuss why you believe the review report is biased or the reviewer has made technical errors in the review process. Remember that they're all human. They're trying the best they can. They are reviewers on a voluntary basis, and they sometimes may not be able to appreciate fully what you're trying to say. Now, in the case where you choose to go ahead with submission to a new journal, then if you have, obviously this is a choice you would take if you've received a hard rejection or cannot complete the revisions that you were recommended from the original journal. So in this case, try to take advantage of any feedback you got from the reviewers or the editor of your original submission in order to improve your manuscript and then prepare it for its next step. Obviously, you will not be including the point-by-point response to reviewers when you prepare for a submission to a new journal, but the feedback that you got from them can help you prepare a much stronger, possibly, manuscript. So, coming towards the end of our presentation, allow me to summarize the key take-home messages that I would like to share with you. First of all, don't forget, rejection is far more common than acceptance. It's an integral process of scientific self-improvement, and try to view it as such, no matter how painful it can be at times. Every rejection makes us think harder, work harder, and mature scientifically. Every rejection is an opportunity to grow and aim higher. And sometimes you may get rejected from one journal and resubmit to an even better one and get your manuscript accepted in a better one. And you should aim to do so. Learn from every rejection, improve, and aim even higher. And with these notes, we're coming to the end of this presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm here to answer any questions. Best of luck with all your future submissions.
Thank you, Dr. Despina, for the excellent session. So we do have to